I woke up in the hospital groggy from surgery and heard something that made my blood run cold. "Don't let them take him home tomorrow," the nurse whispered, barely audible. My son Tom sat nearby pretending to care while planning how he'd sell my house the moment I was gone. Have you ever felt that betrayal close to home? Share your story in the comments. "Don't let them take him home tomorrow," I heard a nurse whisper to another, her voice, low, almost too soft to catch. I couldn't quite place why those words hit me so hard. They weren't about the pain I felt or the surgery, but something else. The kind of unease that you can't shake even when you're not sure where it comes from. It wasn't long before I realized I wasn't alone. Tom, my son, sat by the bed, his eyes shadowed with worry. He was trying to look concerned, trying to put on the face of a son who cared. But I knew that look. I knew it all too well. It was the same face he had worn when he needed something, when the weight of the world was too heavy, and he thought I'd take care of it. He stood up as soon as I stirred, his voice shaky. "Dad, how are you feeling? You gave us all a scare, you know?" I nodded, too exhausted to speak. I could see through him, though. His eyes were not the eyes of a son worried for his father's health. They were calculating, as if he were already thinking of the next move. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what I overheard next. Just as I closed my eyes again, too tired to stay awake, I heard him mutter something to Emily, his wife. "If he doesn't make it, we'll sell the house. Split the money. Everything will be fine. We'll figure it out." The words hit me like a slap in the face. I hadn't even fully woken up yet, and already they were making plans. Not for my recovery, not for how they could help me through this, but for how they could profit off my weakness. I forced myself to stay still, to not react. The sting of betrayal cut deep, but I wasn't going to show it, not yet. There was still too much I needed to figure out. The urge to confront them was strong, but I resisted. I couldn't let my emotions control me, not when I was at my most vulnerable. I had to hold my ground. Tom leaned in again, speaking in a tone that tried to sound soothing. "Don't worry, Dad. We'll take care of you. We'll get through this together." His words were hollow, meaningless. It was hard to believe anything he said when I knew the truth. The days blurred together after I left the hospital, a haze of discomfort and confusion. I didn't feel quite like myself, and neither did the world around me. Something had shifted, and I wasn't sure when it happened or how. My home felt different, the air thicker, the people colder. Tom and Emily continued to visit, but the warmth I used to feel from their presence was gone. Tom would sit at the edge of my bed asking how I was doing, but his eyes never met mine. There was no true concern in his voice, just a hollow, rehearsed tone that rang false. Emily smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. It never did anymore. At first I thought it was just the after effects of surgery that I was imagining things. But as the days went on, I started to notice the subtle shifts. The way they spoke to me, the things they didn't say. They'd ask about my health, sure, but always in a way that felt more like an interrogation, like they were trying to figure out how much longer I could hold on. They weren't worried about my well-being. They were concerned about my life insurance, my assets. And I couldn't ignore it any longer. The weight of it hit me when I overheard them one evening. I had been resting the room dim and still when I heard Tom murmur to Emily, "If he doesn't make it, we'll sell the house. Split everything. It'll be fine." My chest tightened, and I almost couldn't breathe. They weren't planning for my recovery. They were planning for my death. I had been so wrapped up in their visits, in pretending that things hadn't changed, that I hadn't noticed their true intentions. For a moment I was paralyzed. I couldn't confront them, not yet. I didn't have the strength, physically or emotionally, to do anything. So I stayed silent. Watched. Waited. But as the days passed, that silence started to feel heavier. The more I thought about it, the more I realized I wasn't just staying silent for my health anymore. I was letting them walk all over me. I had let them manipulate me for too long, let them take what they wanted without ever giving anything in return. The love they had for me, it didn't exist. Not anymore. They were only interested in what they could get. The internal battle raged inside me. A part of me wanted to let it go, to just slip into the background and let life unfold as it would. I could pretend that it didn't matter, that I didn't care. I could accept it, let them take what they thought was theirs. But there was another part of me buried deep that wasn't ready to let go. I couldn't let this be the end, not when they'd stolen everything I had left. It wasn't just about the money, it was about respect, about dignity, about everything I had worked for my entire life, everything I had built from the ground up. And to see them dismiss it all so casually, it made something inside me snap. I could feel the tension in the air, the way people around me started to treat me differently. Friends, co-workers, even the neighbors. It was like they all knew something I didn't. I couldn't figure it out at first, but then it hit me. They saw it too. They saw how my own family treated me. They saw how my son and daughter-in-law were only concerned with what they could get from me. And the worst part, it was as if no one believed I was capable of standing up for myself. They thought I was just an old man too weak to do anything but sit back and take it. No one said anything outright, but I could see it in their eyes, the pity, the judgment, the condescension. I wasn't going to take it anymore. That's when Sarah reached out. She had always been there for me. A friend, a confidant, and now a lifeline. Sarah and I had known each other for years. She was the one person I trusted completely, the one person who never let me down. She was a lawyer, sharp and relentless, with a fire inside her that I admired. I met her for coffee one afternoon, needing to talk, needing guidance. As soon as she saw me, she knew something was off. "You've been quiet, Michael," she said, her gaze piercing. "What's going on?" I hesitated, unsure of how much to say. But the words came tumbling out, a rush of everything I had been bottling up. I told her about Tom and Emily, about their coldness, their sudden interest in my finances, their discussions behind my back. I told her how I had overheard them, how it felt like they had already written me off. Sarah didn't say much at first, just listened. But when I was done, she spoke in her calm, measured voice. "You can't let them do this to you. You've spent your life building everything you have. And now they want to take it. They want to take your dignity too." Her words struck deep. I hadn't realized how much I had been willing to ignore, how much I had been willing to sacrifice just to keep the peace. "They're your family," she said. "But that doesn't mean you have to let them walk all over you. You deserve more than that. You deserve respect. You deserve control." I knew she was right. But even as the realization hit, I wasn't sure I was ready. I wasn't sure I could do it. Not when I felt so weak, so vulnerable. But Sarah wasn't letting me off the hook. "Now it's time to speak up. Stand up for yourself, Michael. Or you'll lose everything." Her words echoed in my mind as I walked home that afternoon. The rumors started almost imperceptible at first. A conversation here, a passing comment there. It was a friend from the past, someone I hadn't spoken to in months, who first brought it up. He was someone I trusted, though we'd lost touch over the years. We'd shared a few drinks at a bar on a Friday night, catching up like old times. It wasn't until the second round of drinks that he casually mentioned hearing whispers about Tom and Emily. "I don't know, Michael. I've heard some things," he said, his voice hesitant. "People are talking about the family. About how, well, they're planning to manage your estate." I didn't react immediately, dismissing it as idle chatter. But something about the way he said it, how he was so careful with his words, lingered in my mind. I had always trusted Tom. He was my son, after all. But this conversation shook something deep within me. Was it really possible? Could it be that they were already looking at what they could take from me, even while I was still here? The idea clung to me, an uncomfortable thought that refused to let go. As the days passed, the whispers seemed to grow louder, more insistent. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The more I thought about it, the more doubts crept in. What had seemed like simple concern from Tom and Emily now felt like calculated interest. I couldn't ignore the signs any longer. Tom had become more distant. He'd stop by, of course, always at regular intervals like clockwork, but it was as if he wasn't really there. His concern felt like a performance, a routine he had perfected. He'd ask about my health, but there was no real inquiry in his tone, no sincerity. Just a cold, mechanical question. "How are you feeling today, Dad?" It wasn't a question. It was a check-off on a list, nothing more. It was when Tom began to restrict my access to important documents that I knew something was off. The first time it happened, I thought maybe it was just a slip-up. But it happened again. And again. He'd say, "I'll take care of that for you," when I asked about my accounts or legal papers. Every time I wanted to make a phone call or review something myself, he'd insist it wasn't necessary. "It's all in hand, Dad." "You don't need to worry about it," he'd say, as though I was incapable of managing my own affairs. I felt a shift, a tightening around the things I had spent years building. It wasn't just about the documents, it was the way he looked at me. Like I was something to be managed, to be controlled. My autonomy, my ability to make decisions for myself was slipping away. And the worst part was I could feel it, but I couldn't prove it. I started to doubt myself. Was I just imagining it? Maybe I was reading too much into things. Maybe I had been too quick to judge Tom and Emily. The confusion gnawed at me. Had they really changed? Or was I simply too vulnerable to see things clearly? My mind twisted with uncertainty. But then I caught them again. This time it was the two of them sitting at the kitchen table when I was supposed to be resting. They were discussing something, unaware I was just outside the door. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but the words hit me like a slap to the face. "We need to get control of the property," Tom was saying. "It's too much of a hassle to manage when he's in this state. If he doesn't sign those papers soon, we might need to do it another way." Emily's voice was low but sharp. "I know. But he's so stubborn. He won't give up control. We just have to be patient. If he doesn't have the energy to fight, we'll get what we need." It was like a switch had flipped inside me. This wasn't just concern over my health anymore. This wasn't even about family. It was about power, about taking what they thought was theirs before I could take it back. I began to keep track of important documents, the ones Tom had locked away or hidden from me. I started to make copies of them, stashing them in places they wouldn't think to look. The feeling of control, even just a small amount, gave me a strange sense of power. I wasn't going to let them take everything from me without a fight. It happened sooner than I expected. Tom was relentless, and he wasn't going to let me slip away without putting me in a corner. One afternoon, after a long silence between us, he came into the room holding a stack of papers, his face set in that same too calm expression. "Dad, it's time to get everything in order," he said, sliding the papers across the table. His voice was smooth, as though we were having a casual conversation. "Just sign here and we can take care of all the details. You don't need to worry about anything else." I stared at the papers. The words blurred for a moment. This wasn't just about healthcare or bills anymore. No, it was a contract, a legal document about my property. And suddenly everything I'd been avoiding came into sharp focus. Tom wasn't being concerned. He was being strategic. "You don't need to stress about this," he added, watching me closely. "I'll take care of everything. Just sign and we'll make sure you're comfortable." I wanted to shout at him, to throw the papers back in his face and demand an explanation. But I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I held my ground, my pulse steady, my thoughts rushing. This was the moment. If I signed those papers, it was over. He would control everything. Emily, too. The house, the money, my life, all would be in their hands. They would win. I didn't respond at first. Tom's eyes darted between me and the papers, his patience thinning, but he didn't push too hard. Not yet. I could feel the weight of the decision pressing against me. I had been here before letting things slip by letting them take whatever they wanted. But this was the line I couldn't cross. "I'm not signing anything today," I said, my voice steady, despite the storm inside me. Tom's face froze. A flicker of irritation passed over his features before he masked it with a forced smile. "Dad, it's not a big deal. Just a formality. We've been over this. You don't need to worry." "I don't care," I replied, sharper now. "I'm not signing." The silence hung thick in the air, and for a brief moment Tom seemed to hesitate. Then, as if the words had been rehearsed, he spoke again, trying to smooth over the tension. "All right, fine. But you have to understand things won't move forward without it. If you really want to handle everything yourself, that's your choice, but you're not making it any easier on anyone." His words were meant to provoke guilt, to make me feel like I was causing trouble. But I wasn't falling for it anymore. The old Michael, the one who let his family walk all over him, was gone. When Tom finally left the room, I sat there staring at the papers. It wasn't just about the signature anymore. It was about control. It was about who decided what happened to me, to my life. And it wasn't going to be him. But I knew it wasn't over. Tom didn't give up that easily. The fallout came quickly. The next day, I found myself being pushed aside more than ever. He began taking steps to limit my access to things I had always managed, my accounts, my business affairs. Everything was slipping away, one piece at a time. Tom had reached out to my business contacts and told them I was no longer in charge of the decisions. He'd placed his name in the lead, acting like the authority figure I once was. It wasn't direct, but it was enough. Enough to make me feel like a ghost in my own life. I had never felt so small. And yet, strangely, I could feel a fire stirring within me. I had let this happen. I had been silent for too long, but now I couldn't just sit back and take it. Tom and Emily were trying to take everything, and they thought I'd just let them. But I wasn't done. Not yet. They had underestimated me, and that would be their mistake. The next day when Tom came to check on me, I didn't let him see the defeat in my eyes. Instead, I acted like everything was fine, as if his actions hadn't made my blood boil. I didn't let him know I was already making my move, silently gathering every bit of evidence I could get my hands on. I kept track of the things he had hidden from me, the documents he thought I hadn't noticed. But it wasn't just the papers. It was the subtle ways he'd used his influence to undermine me. It was everything he'd done to manipulate me into thinking I was powerless. The phone rang late one evening, breaking the quiet of my house. I wasn't expecting any calls, especially not after the mess with Tom. But this one felt different. The voice on the other end was distorted, rough, as if they were trying to keep their identity hidden. "Listen, Michael," the voice said, low and hurried. "I don't have much time, but I've been hearing things about Tom and Emily. They're making moves you won't like. They've been discussing your assets. It's not just about you, it's everything you've built. They're trying to take control. Don't trust them." The call ended abruptly, leaving me stunned. A strange mix of disbelief and anger twisted in my gut. Was this some kind of prank? But something about it felt real. This wasn't the first time I'd been told something like this. But now it was different. This person knew too much. My mind raced. The pieces that had seemed so fragmented were beginning to click together. Tom and Emily were playing a dangerous game, and I had been too blind to see it. The weight of it all started to settle in. All the signs were there. The subtle power plays the words they chose to leave unsaid, their attempts to control my finances. It wasn't just about me being weak or vulnerable. They were already trying to take over long before my health had started to fail. I sat there for a while, my hand shaking slightly as I put the phone down. I was angry, yes, but I was also scared. What did I do now? The rumors, the whispers, they weren't just random anymore. They had weight, and they were coming for me. If I didn't act, everything I had worked for, everything I had spent my life building would be lost. It was then that Sarah called, just as she had done so many times before, but this time her voice had a different urgency. "Michael, I need you to listen carefully," she said. "I've been thinking about this all day, and I know you're starting to understand what's going on. But you need to act quickly. The longer you wait, the harder it'll be to take control back. You can't let them run the show." Her words hit hard. They were true. I had been hesitating for too long, telling myself I needed more time, that I had to wait for the right moment. But the right moment was slipping away. Sarah was right. I was running out of time. "How do I even begin?" I asked her, my voice barely above a whisper. "Start with the documents," she replied. "I know you've been keeping track of everything, but now it's time to pull everything together. You need to get everything you can, copies, proof, anything that shows what they've been doing behind your back. The more you have, the better chance you've got. But don't wait any longer." Her advice was solid, but the reality of it settled heavily in my chest. This wasn't just about getting documents. It was about taking back control of my life. It was about standing up to the people I had loved and trusted the most, and that thought terrified me. But it also made me angry. They weren't just taking my assets. They were taking my dignity. Over the next few days, I gathered everything I could. I spent hours sifting through papers, pulling out anything I could find that might be useful. Emails, bank statements, legal contracts. There was a moment when I felt like I was drowning in them, but I had to keep going. There was no turning back now. Tom kept trying to push me further into a corner, to convince me that I was just overreacting. "You don't need to worry about the details, Dad," he'd say with that same dismissive tone, as if everything was in hand. "We've got everything covered, just trust us." The more he said that, the more it felt like a lie. The more he talked, the more I realized he was trying to control the narrative. He was trying to make me feel like I was too sick, too weak to handle anything on my own. He didn't know it, but every time he spoke like that, it pushed me closer to action. But as I prepared to face them, something strange happened. The rumors started to spread. Tom and Emily weren't just trying to control me, they were trying to isolate me. The people around me began to look at me differently. My friends, my colleagues, even neighbors started pulling away. No one outright said anything, but I could feel it. They were being influenced by Tom's version of the story. Emily had always been good at painting a picture, and now it seemed like she was using that to her advantage. People around me were beginning to believe I was too sick to think clearly, too ill to manage things on my own. They saw me as a burden, not a person. The isolation was the hardest part. It wasn't just Tom and Emily trying to control my life. It was the whole community turning their backs on me, convinced I was weak and incapable. That was when the weight of what was happening really hit me. I wasn't just fighting for my assets anymore. I was fighting for my life, my reputation, my identity. I was fighting to prove that I wasn't just an old man waiting to be discarded. I wasn't done yet. I knew I couldn't keep waiting. I had to act. The next step was clear. I had to fight back. And I couldn't do it alone. I called Sarah, letting her know everything that had happened over the past week. She listened calm, as always, and then said what I needed to hear. "It's time, Michael. This isn't just about property. This is about your dignity, about making sure they don't take everything from you." The plan was simple, but its execution required precision. I had started gathering every piece of evidence I could find, papers, emails, anything that could prove Tom and Emily's intentions. Each day I grew more methodical in my approach, pulling records from hidden places, revisiting old contracts, and asking questions no one wanted to answer. The more I uncovered, the clearer it became They were manipulating everything. It wasn't just about money, it was about control. And I would take that control back piece by piece. Sarah's role became even more critical. She was the one person I could trust to help me navigate this dark labyrinth. We spent hours on the phone, going over documents and discussing strategies. She helped me analyze everything, logically urging me not to get emotional, but to stay focused on the end goal. The rage that had been bubbling up in me slowly simmered down as Sarah reminded me that emotions would only cloud my judgment. "Don't let them make you feel weak, Michael," she said one night. "You have the facts. That's your power. We just need to use it." Her words rang in my ears as I sifted through more paperwork that night. Each file, each email, was another layer of their deceit. I found a trail, small but undeniable, of hidden transfers, secret communications. Tom had been making decisions without my consent, pulling the strings behind the scenes. I could feel the weight of it pressing down on me, but I couldn't back away now. The logic was clear. My best chance at taking control was to build a case they couldn't deny. And the more I gathered, the sharper I became in recognizing the subtle moves they'd made. The twisted language in their communications, the way they'd tried to isolate me, all of it pointed to one thing: they didn't want me to see what they were doing. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The messages started coming in small at first, from unknown numbers. Cryptic texts with vague threats. "You don't know what you're dealing with." "It won't be so easy, Michael." I could feel their presence even when they weren't around. It was as if they were trying to remind me who had the power. But it only fueled my determination. If anything, it made me more aware that I was on the right track. One afternoon, while going over some financial records, I heard the faint sound of a car outside. I didn't think much of it at first, but then I noticed it again the next day, and the day after that. They were keeping an eye on me. I wasn't imagining it. Someone was watching my house, waiting for the right moment to strike. I took precautions. I made sure I wasn't alone when I went out, checking my surroundings, covering my tracks as best I could. If they thought I was unaware, they were wrong. I wasn't going to let them close in on me without a fight. "Michael, don't let them scare you," Sarah told me over the phone when I mentioned it. "They're trying to intimidate you, to throw you off balance. Don't give them that power." It wasn't just Tom and Emily anymore. They had pulled others into their web, people who didn't know the truth, but were now part of the narrative. Friends, business associates, even neighbors. They'd been spreading rumors, painting me as incapable, as if I were a frail old man just waiting to crumble. The more I heard, the more I realized how deep the manipulation went. Tom and Emily had cast a web around me, isolating me from everyone who might help. They were turning my own life into a prison, and they were doing it with the help of people who had once been my allies. I had to act fast, but not without a plan. Every step had to be carefully calculated. One mistake, and everything could fall apart. It was late one evening when Sarah called with the final piece of the puzzle. She had found something crucial in the documents I had given her. A transfer of funds hidden in plain sight, a payment that didn't make sense. It was the evidence we needed. With that, I could prove that Tom and Emily weren't just trying to control my life. They were deliberately trying to steal from me. "We've got them, Michael," she said. "This is what we need to show everyone. This is the proof." Her words were like a light breaking through the fog. The plan was in motion. I knew what had to be done. I had to move quickly but carefully. If I played my cards right, this would be the turning point. The battle wasn't over, but it was about to take a very different turn. I spent the next few days organizing everything, putting it into a file that couldn't be disputed. I couldn't afford to hesitate anymore. My entire life had led up to this moment, and I wasn't going to back down now. This wasn't just about money. This was about respect. My self-respect, my dignity. The day I had been preparing for finally arrived. I wasn't going to let Tom and Emily control my fate any longer. With everything in place, I was ready to confront them, ready to show them that I wasn't the weak man they thought I was. The time had come. I made the call to Sarah my last move before the confrontation. Let's do this. The confrontation was inevitable. I knew it was coming, but I hadn't expected it to happen so soon. Tom had grown impatient. He could see that I was no longer the weak, passive father he could control, and he wasn't going to let me slip away without one last push. That afternoon, Tom came over alone. His eyes narrowed with an intensity that sent a chill through me. He didn't greet me with his usual pretense of concern. Instead, he walked straight to the living room, his expression colder than I had ever seen. "We need to settle this, Dad," he said, his voice sharp, cutting through the silence between us. "You've been dragging your feet for too long. It's time to sign those papers. This is your last chance." I stood there, feeling the weight of the decision pressing against me. I had fought for control, for my dignity, but this was different. This wasn't just another document I could ignore. This was the end of it all if I gave in. Tom leaned in closer, his gaze unwavering. "You don't get it, do you? You're not in a position to make demands. If you don't sign, you're going to lose everything." His words were designed to break me, to make me feel small, insignificant. But I wasn't going to let him. Not now. Not after everything I had discovered. "Tom, I'm not signing anything," I said, my voice steady, despite the tightness in my chest. A flicker of anger flashed across his face, but he quickly masked it. "You'll regret this, old man. If you don't sign, things will get messy. You won't be able to fight it. And you'll lose." I could feel the pressure mounting, his words sinking deep into my thoughts. He was trying to corner me, trying to make me think I had no choice. I could see through it now, the manipulation, the control. But even as the pressure built, I refused to let him see how much it was affecting me. I wasn't going to crumble under his demands. I said no. I replied, my voice now more firm. Tom stared at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of disbelief and frustration. But I knew what he was thinking. This wasn't just about the papers, it was about power. He wanted to make me feel like I had no control over my own life. He wanted to reduce me to a puppet he could control, but I wasn't going to let that happen. He pushed harder, his words venomous. "You're just making this harder on yourself. You're not in charge anymore. It's time to face facts. You're not as strong as you think. You can't keep fighting this." The words stung, but they weren't enough to break me. I had already made my decision. Tom's next move came quickly. It wasn't just words anymore. He started pulling strings behind my back, trying to manipulate my finances, trying to undermine my authority wherever he could. I could see him pulling away the resources that had always been mine. My connections, my reputation, everything that made me who I was. In the blink of an eye, everything I had worked for seemed to slip away. He was trying to erase me from the equation, trying to make sure I had nothing left. His actions were swift, decisive, and ruthless. And it was working. But I couldn't give up. Not like this. I had gathered the evidence. I knew exactly what Tom and Emily had been up to behind closed doors. The transfer of funds, the hidden communications, the lies they had fed me, every piece was in place. I wasn't going to let them take everything from me without a fight. Then the worst blow came. Tom and Emily, in their desperation, started using the one thing that I had always relied on, my reputation. They went to the people in my life, the people who had always stood by me and painted a picture of me as a man losing his mind. They twisted the truth, they spread rumors, they made me look like I was incapable of managing my own life. Suddenly, people I had trusted, people who had known me for years, started to pull away. Friends, business associates, even neighbors, all of them suddenly believed that I was no longer the man I used to be. Tom and Emily had spun their web so effectively that they had made me the villain in my own story. The isolation stung more than anything. But as I sat there watching it unfold, something inside me snapped. I wasn't going to let them take everything. I wasn't going to let them destroy everything I had worked for: my reputation, my assets, my self-respect. The fight had come to me, and now it was my turn to take control. With Sarah's help, I put the pieces together. I organized the evidence I had gathered, the proof of their manipulation and deceit. It was time to go public. Time to show the world what they had been trying to hide. When I stood in front of a judge with the weight of everything I had discovered in my hands, I knew there was no turning back. The legal battle had begun. I was finally ready to fight back. The calm, calculating man I had become stood in stark contrast to the one I had been in the past. The old me, the one who had quietly endured, who had let others take control, was gone. The battle was over. For the first time in years, I felt a strange sense of peace, a calm I hadn't known in a long time. The anger that once burned inside me, the pain of betrayal, it had all simmered down to something more manageable. I had faced the truth, fought for what was right, and in doing so, I had reclaimed something much more valuable than my assets, my dignity. In the end, it wasn't the financial win that mattered the most. The real victory was the strength I had found in myself. The man I had been, the man who let his family dictate his life, who accepted betrayal without a fight, was gone. In his place stood someone different, someone who had learned to confront the ugliness, to walk away without the weight of regret. Tom and Emily had to face the consequences of their actions. The evidence I had gathered was undeniable, and it spread like wildfire once it was exposed. Tom, once the golden child, now found himself under investigation for financial fraud. His name, once spoken with respect, was now tainted by suspicion and scandal. Emily wasn't spared either. The community that had once embraced her now looked at her with disdain, shunning her for the manipulation and deceit she had orchestrated. I didn't take pleasure in their downfall. I didn't feel satisfaction from seeing them pay for their actions. What I felt was something colder, something sharper. Justice. They had crossed a line, and now they were being held accountable. It was the only thing that mattered. I could have gone to them, demanded an apology, forced them to see the harm they had caused. But I didn't. In the end, I didn't need their acknowledgement, their remorse. They would have to live with the consequences of their choices, just as I had to live with the scars of their betrayal. "Do you want to talk to them?" Sarah asked me, her voice cautious, when she noticed the silence that had settled over me after the fallout. "No," I replied. "I've already said everything I needed to say." The silence in my home was now different. It was no longer oppressive, filled with the weight of unresolved tension. It was a calm that came with knowing that the scales had been balanced. There was no more hiding, no more pretending. The truth had been laid bare, and with it, the last remnants of their hold on me were gone. The legal proceedings were dragging on, but I didn't need to be part of it anymore. I had already made my peace. Tom and Emily were no longer part of my life, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel the sting of their absence. They were gone, not just physically, but from my heart. They had already taken enough from me, but now I had taken back what was rightfully mine. I could have stayed angry. I could have let the bitterness fester, let it shape the rest of my life. But that wasn't who I was anymore. I had learned the hard way that the weight of anger was too heavy to carry for long. It was exhausting, and it wasn't worth it. So I moved forward. I didn't need to look back. The future was mine to shape, free from the chains of their manipulation. I resumed my work, my projects, my life, this time, with a clearer vision of what I wanted. I started new ventures focused on giving back, building something that truly mattered. I had more than enough to get by, but I didn't want my legacy to be defined by wealth. I wanted to be known for the work I did, for the impact I made on my own terms. When the time was right, I joined a community charity working on causes I had always believed in, but never had the time to pursue. It was small, but it felt real. It felt like I was starting fresh, like I was becoming the person I had always wanted to be, but had been too afraid to become. The world around me moved on, just as it always did. But I had changed. The man who had once been controlled by others who had let his family walk all over him was gone. In his place was a man who had learned how to stand tall, to take back his power, and to live life on his own terms. I never spoke to Tom or Emily again. They never reached out, and I didn't need them to. I didn't need their apology. I didn't need their approval. I had found something more valuable than their love, my own peace. The justice I had fought for was cold, but it was exactly what I needed. It wasn't about revenge or anger. It was about reclaiming my life. And in the end, that's all that mattered. As I stood at the window looking out at the world I had come back to, I knew I had finally found the freedom I had been searching for all these years. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free.